The IMF's mission is to oversee the stability of the international monetary and financial systems. It also tries to resolve financial crises and attempts to promote financial growth and to alleviate poverty. To achieve this mission, the IMF keeps tabs on the economic health of its member countries and acts accordingly. If the country is doing well, it alerts them to possible future risks and provides other policy advice. If the country is in dire economic straits, it gives the country conditional loans and provides technical assistance and training to improve economic management. It also attempts to alleviate poverty, though balancing payments and improving economic efficiency always takes priority. The IMF has 187 member countries. It is a specialized agency of the United Nations, but it has its own charter, governing structure, and finances. Its members are represented through a quota system broadly based on the relative size in the global economy. The IMF was founded in 1945. There were 29 original member countries with the original goal of stabilizing exchange rates and assisting the reconstruction of the world's international payment system. Originally, the countries contributed to a pool which could be borrowed from on a temporary basis by a country with financial imbalances.
IMF programs have constrained healthcare spending mostly because the IMF is too pessimistic about how much aid will materialize, or because it takes too conservative a view about what policies are needed to sustain sufficient economic stability. The IMF response to such criticisms is that governments are responsible for choices on expenditure priorities, and that the fund does not set targets for spending or wages in particular sectors. However, health outcomes and economic policies are linked in complex ways, involving many policy issues beyond the scope of the IMF's power. Though the IMF does not directly regulate healthcare spending, the content of IMF programs can have important indirect effects upon the healthcare sector, through the size of overall public spending and structural adjustment programs. In countries with weak or struggling economies, the burden of short-term expenditure cuts can fall disproportionately on healthcare spending. These are the same type of budget cuts that the IMF often imposes. Also, the nature of healthcare spending, which requires significant infrastructure and training, makes it even more susceptible to budgetary cuts. A prime example of this is the impact of the IMF had on Tanzania's healthcare system. In the early 1970s, Tanzania underwent an economic crisis due to a number of factors. The IMF began intervening in the late 1970s. The fund granted loans to Tanzania and imposed a number of adjustment programs on the Tanzanian government. Even though the IMF intervened in the country's economy, it did not improve, and the GDP actually declined by 12% from 1979 to 1985. The government was forced to heavily cut healthcare spending due to IMF policies. The IMF told Tanzania to stop investing in unproductive sectors like healthcare and education. On a short-term and long-term basis, the productivity of the nation will be negatively affected by decreased spending on healthcare and education. The IMF further recommended that communities should take a greater control for health services, not the national government. But the communities were not equipped to deal with this, and the federal government had already invested heavily in infrastructure for healthcare. This had devastating consequences. In 1988, 71 mothers died during pregnancy in 13 weeks. In the 1970s, this would have been the yearly death rate. The IMF was also not interested in the issue of maintaining equality in income distribution and provision of social services. They even accused the Tanzanian government of over-involvement with equality issues at the expense of production. It seems that IMF policies only serve the interests of capital.
I did not know someone died in my sleep last night. I tried to reach the phone, but in the darkness I knocked over the light. And can you speak up? I say, am I just jackknifed on the turnpike and I'm on a payphone and it's getting to be a cold, cold night. And there's one man in the corner, one man in the hall, one man standing up saying, God, save us all.
As it has already been stated,
structural adjustment programs tend to widen the gap between the rich and the poor in developing nations. Many of the programs also require countries to eliminate subsidies on medicines. This makes it incredibly difficult for low-class citizens to receive adequate healthcare and to pay for simple medications. This, in conjunction with the low living standards, gives rise to widespread outbreaks of disease. One of the most common vectors for infectious diseases is unclean water. In fact, according to the World Health Organization, over 3.4 million people die every year from water-related diseases, making them the leading cause of disease and death around the world. Similarly, at any given time, close to half the population of the developing world is suffering from waterborne diseases that can be directly linked to unclean sources of water and unsafe sanitation. Despite this, however, the IMF is pushing for nations to privatize water supplies, a move that could arguably make an already bad problem worse. The IMF argues that privatization will increase access to clean water because poor nations do not have enough money to subsidize water and sanitation services. However, it would require consumers to cover all water system costs. This would increase the price of water and make it inaccessible to many people. Other, more affluent citizens would have to greatly reduce their use of water. This goes to show that the actions of the IMF are not in accordance with the Catholic social teaching. Although many of their policies favor the wealthy, they simultaneously tend to neglect the poor, leaving them in need of clean water and of medications. Many of these people live in desolate, degrading areas that would probably be considered unlivable by many Western people. Their dignity as human beings is undermined.
One man in a corner, one man in a hall, one man standing up saying, God save our soul. One man in a corner, one man in the hall, one man standing up saying, God save our soul. One man in the man in the man. Have you not seen the woman that belongs to this one? She was uptight thinking about the roll of the side you were on. Have you not seen the woman that belonged to this one? She was uptight thinking about the roll of the side you on, side you on, side you on, side you on, side you on.